Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Today I have probably one of the biggest guests I've ever had. I've done this since 1975, and I have with me today Whitley Streiber, who is an award-winning author. He's sold millions of books. I would say he probably has the #1 known book in the UFO field, Communion, which was his 1985 experience. And if you go to even to go to Amazon and look at the comments in the Communion, under the Communion book, you'll see a lot of people that I've run into, everybody's run into, that said, when I saw the cover of that book, I knew I was involved in this whole thing. It was like a triggering book. He's written a lot of other fiction and nonfiction books. You can see some of them behind me: Jesus and a New Vision, A New World, and The After Life Revolution, which I want to talk about because I'm into the same sort of thing, that we realize that this is not just UFOs. It deals with life after death. It has a lot of other paranormal stuff that are all linked in. Whitley has his own website, which is unknowncountry.com, and his podcast, which I'm lucky enough to have been on, and I will be on again, which is Dreamland. So welcome, Whitley, and thank you for coming to entertain the people that I talk to every week. I have a podcast, so we'll put this out on audio, and we'll also put it out on the YouTube.
Okay, wonderful.
Beautiful. Now, you've told so many interesting stories. I think you should actually do a book called Whitley's Stories, because you're a really good storyteller. And I think that's, maybe you can agree with me, that that's what they want. So they do these weird things, these weird little stories, and they want you to tell the stories, because if you confront somebody face to face with this thing, they just sort of make the sign of the cross and tell you to back away. But if you tell these little interesting stories, people just slowly move into it, and they're very interested in sort of what we're talking about. The first story I want to ask about, and I heard you talk about it in one interview, and I was sort of floored, where you talked about the fact that you were dealing with the visitors. You call them the visitors, and you weren't the easiest guy to deal with. And you talk at one point about trying to steal a flying saucer. Can we start with that? Like, what was that about?
Okay, well, that was one of the most unusual of these experiences. People do end up in these things. I was certainly in one on the night of December the 26th, 1985. The reason it didn't get into Communion because he didn't tell me in time, but one of my neighbors saw the whole thing happen.
Yep.
He saw the UFO in the field and heard somebody screaming inside of it. And when he went into the field, where it was, it turned on all these lights all over it and made a growling noise and came toward him. It was 2:00 in the morning, and he and his wife were going home from a party right after Christmas party. And of course, she completely freaked out. And as he said, frankly, so did I. And we jumped back over the fence and got in the car and drove off. He was very ashamed of this because he realized after he saw Communion that it probably had been me that he'd heard screaming, because the field was just a couple of, not even a mile and a half from our houses. And he was a former state trooper, and he felt a sense of responsibility. And I said to him, look, you're very lucky you didn't try to go into that thing. I don't know what would have happened to either one of us or both of us if you'd really tried hard. So that's one thing to say, yes, people actually do end up inside these things. Now, next story, which is going to answer your question. First of all, anyone who knows me, and that probably includes the visitors, knows I'm going to try anything, and I will try anything. I am not afraid to try. So what happened was I found myself inside one of these things. It was a familiar one. It had been landing on our deck at our country house off and on for a while. And a number of people had taken rides in it where they had gone up to it. It was a funny little thing with a kind of a snout and a square shape behind it. What's weird about that is that's what I used to see when I was a kid And once when I was doing Dreamland at KTSA radio in San Antonio, we were feeding the Clear Channel from there back in the 90s. A thing like that showed up over the station, a square UFO. So they've sort of been in my life. Now, I end up in this thing. I do not know how I got into it. I just seemed to, I walked up to it because I could see that it was there. And then the next thing I knew, we were in motion. So there was a gap of some kind there. And the stealing thing was this. I was sitting in this very confined space right beside a man who would have probably been able to walk the street. And I was looking at him, and the more I looked at him, the more he turned away until we were sort of like this, you know, with him turned all the way, me turned all the way around trying to see his face. And so I stopped that, and I thought to myself then, boy, I'd like to steal this thing. And I heard from behind me this sinister laughter. And I don't know what was back there, but what then happened was really one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. We ended up at the home of a family I knew in Boulder, Colorado. And I don't know how much time passed, but it couldn't have been more than, certainly not more than a minute from upstate New York to Boulder, a distance of at least 1,500 miles. And what I experienced or what I remember, and I'm always very dubious about memory when it comes to this stuff. But I that's on the one hand. On the other hand, Anne used to say, Whitley, you've got one of the best memories I've ever known. And I do have a very good memory. It's true enough. So maybe I'm describing something accurately, but I want anyone who listens to, you know, kind of keep in mind that we're dealing here with things that are way outside of the context of our experience, and that makes the mind do funny things. Anyway, we end up in the home of a friends in we outside, and I walk in with these beings. Some of them are little gray people, and there's this tall man. And I'm amazed because I realize I'm seeing some kind of a close encounter experience up close and personal. I'm actually participating in it. They go down and I'm told that they're going to strengthen the spine of the little girl. I know the little girl very well. And they say that someone who has a special relationship with her will be there to comfort her because her mother will not be able to help her. And then I'm end up kind of standing in between the living, the upstairs bedroom was here, and then there was a living room and then a kitchen over here. And I'm kind of standing there in the living room, not knowing what to do, when suddenly, first two things. First, I see a woman sitting at the kitchen table. I see her clearly. She's just sitting there. She looks, I'm not familiar with her, but she looks perfectly normal. Then from below, from the basement, there comes bloody, awful screaming of the little girl. There are thuds start in the bedroom. I go to the bedroom door, and the mother is not in a normal state. She's lurching up and falling back and lurching up and falling back. And her eyes are like dark. I don't know. And the father is dead to the world. He's not moving at all. So I run down the stairs to see what in the name of God is going on, because this little girl obviously is in extremis. And there's one of these spider type creatures that they call the grays striking her, the base of her spine with a little rod, and red light is going up the spine in flashes. And I don't think that then they stop, and almost immediately, before I can say, my God, what are you doing, or anything, the woman comes down and embraces the little girl. Then we leave. I grab stones from the driveway and put them in my mouth in hopes of having them when I come home.
Okay.
I am brought home, and on the way, I can see out these little windows, and it's the most, as we come in close to the cabin, I can see the forest, and it's the most extraordinary thing. Because if you remember in the old days that when a war movie, there would be a war movie and you'd be from a pilot's eye view, you'd be sitting there still and the world would be going around outside like this. That's what it looked like. And that's why I think there's something real about this experience, because I don't think I ever would have dreamed that up. The reason it looked like that, the thing had its own gravity. And now you see these things flying around on the Tic Tacs and stuff without any propulsion or wings or anything. You realize they're flying on gravity. They control their gravity. And that's what it would have looked like if you were in one gravity looking at another. So they take me home. I run upstairs. I take a shower because I felt an unpleasant, greasy feeling. And I'm in a kind of a funny state. I'm not normal. Later, I think to myself, the stones, they're not in my mouth anymore. To this day, I don't know whether they took them out, I spit them out, or I swallowed them. I never passed them. I believe you me, I looked, and I'm not aware of having passed them. There's quite a codicil to this story. The little girl is now a grown woman. We are very close. She is my goddaughter. Anne she's had a hard life, and she did need that spine strengthening boy, and she's very strong. She's gone through hell in her life with her mama dying early. She was not even just barely 20 when her mother died suddenly and unexpectedly. Her father, she needed that, and she needed us. She needed me and Anne knew this story, and Anne just was make sure this girl felt a sense of there's somebody who cares for her and who wants her in their lives. And we talk nearly every day on the phone to this day. Wow. So that's that story. And as far as this woman is concerned who was there, that turned out to be her kindergarten teacher, whom I later met, and I recognized her immediately. Wow. But she had no memory of the experience, or just, if anything, maybe a slight vague memory, and neither did the mother or the daughter, the girl. She still doesn't remember the experience, but she does feel this special sense of relationship. And what's so amazing here is this. You think to yourself, well, Whitley was a special case. He got to see. Nobody else would even know it had happened. Yeah. So who are they really? Who are we? And what is this world really? That's the end of the story.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question about that in a second, but I want to go. You had your experiences up at the cabin up in New York, and a lot of people don't want to mention the fact that you had a bunch of visitors and a lot of witnesses to what was going on there. One of the ones I heard you had was Michael Talbot, and you wrote this probably a book, Communion, that changed the world. But Michael Talbot wrote a book that changed the world too, The Holographic Universe. Now I understand that I always heard he was an experiencer, and Bud Hopkins, was with him and stuff. He was at your cabin. He had an experience at your cabin as well, correct?
He did. We knew he was going to have an experience because the Greys are very jokey, and they were around, and they made, there's a guy named Ralph Swenson who had a little organic farm nearby, and he used to have a table out where you could get his produce. And someone had made cucumbers and things in his lawn, the word Whitley. And, we passed by. I said, "Oh, Ralph's going to be pissed off at me." And Ann said, "You know who's here, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I do know who's here." And Michael came up a couple hours later, and he had an encounter with one of the Grays through the living room door, as I recall. And yeah, a lot of people did up there. Lori Barnes and Raven Dana had encounters up there. Uh, yeah, it was pretty commonplace to have encounters up there. Sorry, I lost the cabin. We probably could still be doing it.
Yeah, you had a tough life, which is my next question. You had a life that, you know, maybe like, you know, and a lot of people like Mother Teresa or Jesus or whatever had life. And my question, you've talked before, people have asked you questions about soul contracts and stuff like that. And you've talked about the fact that later on you realized that you had contact with these beings from birth. And we used to think it was a random event, that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now we sort of know that people have had lifelong experiences. So my question to you is, do you believe that you and Anne came in on a soul contract together to do what you did, and that you may be responsible for everything that happened, that this was all planned, and you're on some sort of mission with Anne, and now she's moved on and you're still on the mission?
She's still on the mission too, believe me.
Yeah.
She's heavily involved in all this. That's why she's sitting back there where you can see her, because this is still a couple and still doing its thing. That's why I wear the both rings.
Yeah.
We are down to one body, but we're definitely still married. We thought about that a lot, Anne and I, because it was so needle in a haystack. We met in this peculiar way. We were both kids living in New York City, and I went to a few singles bars. I was a media planner, and found out very quickly that you have to lie at singles bars if you're going to make any time with the girls. But I'm not do that. I grew up in a family where lying was not something you did ever. My dad was so trustworthy that he did his oil business often without contracts, just with word of mouth, with a lot of money involved quite often. And it just is it's in the blood, I guess. So I would go to these singles bars and say I was a media planner, and the girl's face would just go dead. She wanted the next lawyer, doctor, whatever. All of them were media planners and whatnot, and they were all pretending to be something else. So a media planner was a lowly profession within the advertising industry, and so that didn't work. And I'm not the prettiest fellow either. So that 2 strikes against me, I made no time. Also, I wanted a girl who was smart. I'm smart, and my ideal woman would be smarter than me, because or as smart. And I'm serious about that. That is needed if we're going to have a happy relationship. So I saw in the Village Voice this thing called Mind Mates, and I sent out for their form, and there arrived this huge package in the mail with all kinds of questionnaires and essays to write them. This was a serious deal, and whoever designed it, I mean, they were really into this. So I filled the whole thing out, and I got back a list of names about a week later, and it was a very odd list. There were, I think, 4 names on it. 3 of the girls had the last names of fish: salmon, trout, and something else. And then there was this one called Maddox. So I thought to myself, I think the fish are fake names. I called one of the fish up and actually had a date with her, but we were not for each other, clearly. So then I thought, well, I'm not going to try another fish. I'm going to try this Maddox. And I called her up and made a date. And I met her. I walked into the place where she was working as a receptionist. And this big this girl with big, beautiful brown eyes looked up at me from the reception desk. I didn't know who it was, and I said, "I'm here. I'm here to meet Ann Maddox." And when she said, "I'm Ann," that was it. I thought to myself, "This is my girl. I hope. I don't want to go any farther." And we were together happily for 45 years. So maybe it was a soul contract. I don't know, but it was really love at first sight. I mean, the both of us. I had I was pretty much of a prude. I had not had intimacy with a woman before, except one time, and that was a very unexpected thing. And it happened a few years before, and I was quite embarrassed by it because I was a Catholic at the time, and I believed in the sanctity of marriage, and I grew up in a family where very old fashioned. Nobody kind of made love or shacked up before they got married or anything. And the long and short of it was, within a month, Ann and I weren't married, we're shacked up, and we're running like crazed weasels. And, and we just never stopped. I mean, we couldn't resist each other. It was very extraordinary. We just were overwhelmed. I mean, it's just overwhelming power. So maybe there was some kind of soul contract, but one thing was very clear. Nobody was leaving that apartment. I had a little apartment, and once we were both together in it, that was it. We were not going to part. And
Okay,
it turned out to be.
that
Go
ties
ahead.
into the next part of the question. One of the most profound things I ever heard, I always use the expression when I talk, the Shakespeare's thing, all the world's a stage, all the men and women and the visitors are but actors. We have our entrances and exits, and each man plays many roles. And I remember one of the things that when I heard you tell what Anne had told you after she died, I went, and it's still just every time I hear it, I go, wow. She said, "I'm no longer Anne, but I'll always be Anne to you." And I always remind people, it's like you're not the actor on the stage. You're playing an actor on a stage. Big difference. And so Anne comes onto the stage with you. She plays this role. She leaves, and you've even talked about that she may even be in her next life already. But
Yeah,
she was playing her role. You were playing your role, and this idea that we're all actors, and that we may actually be in agreements with the beings to do certain things to sort of enlighten the world or whatever it is we're supposed to be doing.
well, one thing I got to say, if Anne had been here in the flesh, that collar would never have been turned up. All right, let me, that comment and what's happened since was very profoundly important to me. Anne, when I heard that, I felt a sense of understanding, and I realized that it must be true, because reincarnation is a real thing as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
I've had past lives, and I was shown a few weeks ago a set of images of 11 different past people I've been in the past.
Okay.
And now, why would one of those people be the whole soul? Because somewhere, something has all those memories, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that something has to be very different from Whitley, because it remembers all of those lives. And God knows how far back it goes, or even whether or not they're all connected to the earth or what. So when she said, "I'm not Anne anymore, but I'll always be Anne for you," it sort of scared me. But then I began to come into contact with what I would call a much wiser, although Anne was a wise woman for sure, and more finished version of Anne, and who can say things with meaning that are just extraordinary. Like, I asked her what enlightenment was, and she said, "Enlightenment is what happens when there is nothing left of us but love." And ever, there's nowhere in any literature where enlightenment is it described so clearly in so few words. It's extraordinary, and that's commonplace in the relationship. I'm relating now to a larger version of Anne, who has all of that knowledge and all of those memories, I think. Now, as to her reincarnation, it's possible. I'm permanently linked to this soul. Our souls are married.
Yep.
That's for sure. Uh, Now, what happened then a few couple of years ago was I was at the Esalen Institute, where they have there was a conference of psychics and scientists. They have a special conference thing where they like to get us weirdos together with the straight scientists and drive them all crazy, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, I was there with one of the most powerful psychics I've ever known was there. And she said to me, Whitley, listen, I have a message for you from Anne. You have to let her come back. She's going to reincarnate. And I thought, wow. And then about a week later, another totally unrelated psychic, they don't know each other to this day. They don't know each other in any way,
Okay.
called me and said the same thing. And that meant something to me. I took that very seriously. But between the two of them, I found out who the child is. So I've made it my business. They were the family are friends. They're not weren't close friends. They are now, but they were friends. And it's a little boy. He looks like Anne. He has a fierce temper like Anne did.
Yeah.
And they have no idea of this.
Yeah.
But he said something to me. He was 16 months old, little bitty slip of a thing. And he looked up at me. And these are among, he did, I mean, 16 months, you're not talking a lot.
Yeah.
He had a few words. And he said in this very grave and clear voice, you belong to me. And ever since then, when I go to that house, the first thing that happens is he takes me by the hand, takes me up to his room, closes the door, locks the door, and we play together until he's finished, which is usually about half an hour or so. Then I'm free to see the rest of the family.
Wow. Wow.
And I think it is Anne. I think, and not only that, the psychics both told me that I would reincarnate as a woman and marry him again. So I must not have too much time here because, you know, if that's true, um, uh, and you know, I'm in touch with Anne right now, and I'm and usually this doesn't happen, frankly, Grant, but I just heard her say, nothing is certain. Otherwise, life would not be worth living.
Wow.
Just this moment.
Wow.
It's nothing she's ever said before.
We,
So supposedly I'm going to be
wow. That's
the
interesting.
wife of this little baby.
Yeah.
And so I would guess that would mean I would die sometime in the next few years.
Yeah. But you have had a lot of contact with her after. And I remember you and I were on a conference. This is a couple months ago. It was that Saturday Night Live thing.
Yeah, live thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you gave your presentation and then I gave my presentation and then they went back to the moderator and he said, oh, Whitley wants to talk. Whitley's got something. And the moth was on the camera. Can you talk about the story of the moth and the relationship to Anne?
I will talk about the white moth. Yes. In January, before Anne died, she died in August of 2015. She began asking me to memorize a poem, a certain poem. And when I failed at it, she cried.
Wow.
I did not know why she would seize on this and want me so badly to memorize it. But when my wife cried, that meant a hell of a lot to me. And I not a good memorizer, but I memorized that poem. Boy, I did. It's called The Song of Wandering Angus. And in it, there are the lines: when white moths were on the wing and the moth like stars were flickering out. And it's about a man who encounters a magical girl and she leaves him and he spends the rest of his life searching for her. I'll recite the poem in a moment if you want me to.
Yes, yes, I'd love it.
But then things began to happen. First, I was at the Ozark Mountain UFO Festival, I guess in 2016, and I have surveillance cameras in here, always hoping that the grays will trip up, but they never do. I've got, I have had a life of surveillance cameras that haven't helped, but you never know. I mean, they're on right now. They're always on. So the surveillance camera was on, and I began to get notices from it that there was some movement in the living room, and I looked at this, and there was this moth, this white moth, flying back and forth in front of the camera, and the camera's not lit, so what the heck was going on with this thing? And I never occurred to me it was anything but a normal moth, but there are some pretty wild people at UFO conventions, and one of them was looking at it. He said, "Whitley, I don't think this is a normal moth. I'm getting a funny feeling about this." And then over the next few months, whenever I left the house to go to a conference or anything, the white moth would end up showing up, and I was talking. I had made some connections at that point, and I was talking at a conference about the white moth, and my phone went bloop, and I looked at it in the middle of my speech, and the white moth was flying back and forth in front of the camera. I had been saying that I was beginning to think it might have something to do with Anne. So that was that. I figured it did. Then Christmas comes, and this is about a year and a half later. I'm with my son, with my family, and I'm telling my son about the story of the white moth, sitting together, and boop, the camera phone goes. I look, the white moth is there flying around. Then later, I write the Afterlife Revolution, and I'm at Esalen again. Jeremy Vaeni, the podcaster, is there. He had a podcast on Unknown Country for many years. Anne was crazy about Jeremy. She loved his wit and his refusal to take the high road and a lot of things about it. So I give a presentation at Esalen about Anne and the White Moth and about my book, Afterlife Revolution, or I should say our book, because we wrote it together after she died. And the first thing that happens is a bunch of the scientists and people go up to the main dining room for lunch, and they have a big lunch there. And during lunch, a white moth flies round and round over their heads. And this is February, so it's not like there's a moth anywhere. So they're all very happy and excited. And then we have a final banquet in a private room, a banquet hall. And the white moth shows up. Not only does it show up, it lands on Jeremy's head and sits there. I got a picture of it. Then it takes off, flies toward the fireplace, toward the chimney, and before all of our eyes, it's just gone, disappears like a magic trick. Now, when was the last time the white moth showed up? I was in Texas last week with old friends. We hadn't seen each other in a year, and my friendship with this guy goes back generations. We're really, really good friends. We're like the fourth generation of friends in the families. And I'm real close to his wife as well, of course. And he and Anne and I and his wife were really a foursome for a long, long, long time. In fact, Anne always said if she'd always said that when he said to me, "Whit, don't let this one go," referring to Anne. When you told me that, Whitley, I knew I was in like Flynn. I was going to have a husband. And so, um, uh, she, the white moth showed up again and again and again on the camera while we were there, and especially when we were talking about Anne. And so she was like participating as best she could in the physical level to let us know that she was there, because they're not in this world at all. He's in a completely different area of life and a different business, and he doesn't have experiences. He's not an experiencer in any way, or he wasn't until recently. Um, so that's the story of the white moth.
And you had written about the moth before, wasn't that her favorite story that you had
Oh
written?
yeah, I forgot to tell you about the short story. Yes, the other thing was, and I didn't remember this until right before I started writing Afterlife Revolution. There's a short story of mine I wrote many years ago called The White Moths, which is a story about an elderly woman dying and then discovering that she's dead. And that was Anne's favorite story of all my short stories. And so, and I finally made the connection right before I started the book. And I realized, my gosh, from January, she was already planning all of this, and knew there would be an afterlife and everything. My wife was a really amazing human being. When you met her, she didn't come off as being like a master or anything, but she was. And she would always say to me, the only masters are hidden masters. The only real masters are hidden masters. The ones who go out in front of the public have ego problems.
Yeah.
I think that's what she was, frankly.
Yeah. Can you recite the poem, and then I have another related question to that?
Sure.
Can you?
I can indeed. I went out, excuse me, I went out to the hazelwood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. When white moths were on the wing and the moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I laid it on the floor and went to blow the fire aflame, something rustled on the floor and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering in hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find where she has gone and kiss her lips and take her hands and walk in long dappled grass and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. Isn't that something?
Brew.
She really did
She'll be
know what
applauding right
she
now
was.
that you've done it again.
She knew what
Wonderful.
she was doing, that Annie did.
Wow. So we're talking about communication from the other side. Can you tell the story? Because I've done a book called The Paranormal World of Inspiration, where I look at inventions, I look at people who get stuff from the other side. You've had these contacts with Anne giving you sort of directions and insight and stuff. Can you tell the story about Christian Barnard, the story you told about him?
Yeah, sure. Uh, I knew Christian Barnard a little bit. I met him in a green room, and I think we may have had dinner together at some point. I'm not sure, but he told me a wonderful story. I read his biography, and it's not in the biography, and I can understand why not.
Yeah.
Um, uh, this is what he said. When he had turned out he knew about communion, and I was on a tour for communion at the time, and he said, "Well, I have a story for you. I was in the hospital in Joburg with a myocardial infection. Of course, he's a heart doctor, so what does he end up with? A heart infection. So, um, and I began to have symptoms that I knew were dangerous. And I started punching the call button, and no one came in. And then suddenly, a woman glided in wearing a long white gown. She leaned over me, and the next thing I knew, her hands had gone into my chest and cradled my heart. Then she pulled her hands out and went out through the window. And I thought, I'm dying. I've died. And in that moment, though, all of the details of the heart surgery went through his mind. It came to him at that moment. And then the nurses came rushing in and started to help him. And they said they had been delayed because the woman in the room next door had just died. And I think it was her soul leaving that left behind this crucial piece of information that has extended so many thousands of lives over the years. Now, there's a codicil to that. Anne knew that story well, of course. And as she passed away, after moments after her death, I noticed, you can see the bedroom is behind that closed door, and there's a little corridor. And I was walking through, and I saw a book opened on a bookshelf that's right here in this room. And I looked at it. It was a book called Physics from Fisher Information, given to me many years ago by a dear friend, Hal Puthoff, and who's very into all of this stuff. A physicist. People probably know his name. And he's, if you Google him, he's loaded up with conspiracy theories, but I only know him as a lovely man. I don't know anything about any conspiracy. So that's not even here nor there for me. Anyway, the book was open to a certain page. That a certain sentence had been underlined in yellow marks a lot, and on it, the part of the underlined part was, the universe began with a single primordial quest for knowledge. And I thought to myself, Annie did this as she left to let me know that it's the truth. And I'm quite sure it is. Another thing that she said more recently, when I was asking her about gravity and why we can't figure it out, she said that a culture that is confined to a materialistic paradigm will never figure it out, because it starts with the yearning that underlies the universe. And until you are able to touch that directly, you will never understand gravity.
Now, you mentioned Hal Puthoff. The next question sort of relates not to him, but that you brought up his name. Do you think, because what I say is to people all the time is, you're never going to figure this thing out unless you talk to people like Whitley Streiber and the people who are actually interacting with the intelligence. Like, they've got all these, rational arguments and ideas and whatever, but there's actually people that are actually talking to the intelligence. So my question would be, do you think Hal understands, and is he in touch with contactees that trying to figure out from them what they're being told? But the question I had that you had brought up before was, you had a message for one of the people. There's a lot of people that are sort of on the inside this invisible college who are trying to figure this thing out. And there's one guy, I think I know who it is. You told the story that you've got a message for him, and he converted into becoming a Catholic. Can you tell that story?
Sure. First, about Hal. I've had usually lunches and dinners and visits with Hal for 30 years. And we were just together, in fact, last week. Uh, this is May the 4th, and 2021.
Yeah.
In any case, uh, and we share stories. We're both back on tours, and we tell each other stories, and he tells of his life experiences and things he's heard from other witnesses. He's very interested in the close encounter phenomenon. I wouldn't say that I know what Hal thinks about it, but I do know he asks very intelligent, open-minded questions, and we have a really enjoyable time together. I don't get into, I know that some of these people apparently have uh, security clearances and access of different kinds, and I don't get into that. I don't have a security clearance, and I'm not wanting to find out their secrets, because I mean, I've got the visitors. They'll tell me anything I need to
Exactly.
know. I'm serious, they will. I think I've upset some people who are in the secret world sometimes, because I end up knowing things that they think are completely secret, and here comes this dope from the outside who knows better than they do. So anyway, so that's Hal. Now, what was the second part of the
The
question
one with
again?
the guy that converted to being a Catholic.
Oh
You got a
yeah,
message
well,
for him.
this is another one of these great stories. So lucky to be living this life. It was so hard at first dealing with the visitors. They were not easy, uh, and then all the social outcast stuff. You know, the only literary award I've ever received in my life is a mock Hugo Award
Wow,
from the some people in the science fiction community. It's
terrible.
it. So I can't even, those three books that you've got behind you were all published by me, because publishers won't touch my stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Um,
Incredible.
yeah, but
Sad.
anyway, and I'm a pariah and an outcast, and I guess that's where I belong. So in any case, what happened was this. I was at the uh, Ions Institute in Petaluma, California. And it was another one of these deals where they gather scientists and they gather weirdos together, and the weirdos and the scientists talk. I mean, I'm joking about it, but it's pretty serious stuff, because they're not ordinary weirdos. I mean, one of the other weirdos there was Kary Mullis, the Nobel Prize winning chemist, who had a marvelous experience of his own.
Yeah.
In any case, I do a meditation by that time I was doing it at 11 at night and at 3 in the morning. And the 3 in the morning one is hard. They started me on that after Annie died. And I do it every morning. I try to wake up myself up. I don't use an alarm clock, because I want this to be organic. And if I don't wake up, they'll wake me up. And sometimes they're not real nice about it too. It can be unpleasant. But mostly it's not. Mostly it's pleasant. Uh, so uh, I was, I'd done the meditation at 3 a.m. At the little room. You have in Ions, you have these dorms with each one a little private room, pretty dinky. And so I was in this room, and not comfortable, very. The bed's not comfortable, and there's a little chair. And I dropped back into bed at about 3:30, and I thought, oh my God, I'm tired as hell, and I drifted off to sleep. 4 o'clock in the morning, wham, a shock goes down my spine. And I thought, damn you, aren't you ever satisfied? I've done the thing. And I thought, I'm not getting out of bed. Then I thought, anyone who is from who knows where, who actually wants me and is interested in enough in me to want me to commune with them in this way, I can't ignore that. And so I got up, and the next thing I knew, I was out in the hall. And I thought, holy God, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and they had these spring locks on the doors, so my door was shut, and I knew it had been locked. So how was I going to get back in? And then I turned around, and I noticed I was sort of gliding. And I was shocked. I thought, my God, I'm out of my body. The thing along the spine, it opens up like a what are locks along the spine, and the second body can leave the body of the first body. They've done that to me any number of times. I I can't do it myself, and it's very frustrating. But in any case, so I go down the hall. I figure I'm going to show myself to Jeff Kripal, who was there, my co-author of Supernatural. I go into his room. He's like sleeping like a log, and you can't wake people up. You can't do anything. You can't shake them or anything. I knew that already. So I go to the next room. There's a lady in it. And I think, no, I don't want to do this because I already had that experience with Linda Moulton Howe, and she was furious at me. I ended up in her bedroom when she was living in Denver, and she was awake, and she was not pleased, and I don't blame her.
She could
Then
sense you being there. I don't
what?
know that story. She could sense you being there. I didn't know that story.
She didn't know I was. I didn't know I would go, and she didn't know I would show up. And I just showed up there, and I remembered having a sort of fuzzy dream about her. And then the next thing I know, she's calling me, and she's furious because of she saw me standing there with my glasses on
Wow.
in a in some kind of a plant she had in the room, and it really scared her. And
Wow.
but we're friends still, and she's talked about it a few times.
Wow.
It's not a she didn't
Yeah.
keep it a secret. The other people have seen me too, and in any case, then I go to the next room, and there's this man in it who's a pretty important guy in the inner world.
Yeah.
And his eyes are open, and he does see me. I can see that. And there's a communication about the importance of the good and of aligning oneself with the good. And this is something I've been pursuing. It's what Jesus, the New Vision, is all about. It's for people, that book is for people who do not have a Christian, they're not part of Christian doctrine, to show them how they can use the teaching to journey in the path of the good. Um, so anyway, the next thing we have this exchange, and I don't really remember it very well, but it profoundly it was part of what caused him to become a Catholic. So it was obviously about pursuing the good. And there's lots of ways of doing that, by the way. It doesn't have to be the Jesus path or Catholicism, or it can be Buddhism. There's any number, and it could just be deeply personal, as long as you're living toward the good. Um, so then I found myself going out through the ceiling, and I went way up in the sky, so high that I could see the dawn coming across the curvature of the earth. It was magnificently beautiful and a little scary because I was far from me at that point. Then I go shooting down into the dawn, and I find myself on a street corner in what is obviously a college campus. A kid comes out of a dormitory, and this would have been a Sunday morning at about 7:15 or so. Comes out of a dormitory in the campus. It was more like 4:15 in Petaluma. Uh, uh, and he walks right through me. I do not succeed in engaging with him. So I go into the dormitory on the theory that even though it's a Sunday morning, he was awake, maybe someone else is awake in there too, and maybe they will engage with me. I go down a hall. I see this object that's sort of halfway up the wall and leaning against a door jamb with a kind of fluted end on it. And I think, is it a giant dulcimer? What could it be? I don't recognize it. I go into the room, and there's a kid sleeping. So I know from experience I'm not going to get anything out of that. So then I think to myself, I'm not sure where I am, but I do know it's dawn here, well into dawn. The sun's well up, and it was dark at Petaluma. And I don't want to I don't want to end up finding a dead body in that room. So as soon as I think that, I go out through the wall and I ascend. And this feeling of movement into the sky, up and down in this state, has got to be one of the most beautiful things you can possibly imagine. And I go way up in the sky, and then the next thing I know, I'm down in Petaluma, back in my bed, and I fall into a deep sleep, which doesn't last but a short time, because the next thing I know, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I get up and I'm thinking, I wonder if X saw me and if he'll say anything about it. And I'm going to ask him. So I go into the breakfast room. It's in an uproar because he's told everybody, he's been texting people ever since it happened. Whitley came into my room and then went out through the ceiling. And then it goes on because the people from the different campuses realize they all want me to describe the campus. And I described the campus, and Diana Pasulka and Patricia Teresi say, that's our campus.
Wow.
And a year later, I went to the campus and I went into the dormitory. In other words, I saw the dormitory physically a year after I had seen it in the out of the body experience. And what was leaning up against the wall was a thing called a longboard, which is a built really long skateboard. It was right outside the same dorm room.
Wow.
And it was awesome to see this. It was really extraordinary. So that's that story. That's the story of the guy.
That's fascinating. So we do get sort of help from the other side in terms of, moving us along, giving us clues and stuff. So I've only got a couple more questions. When we do Dreamline, ask me about the 3 o'clock thing, and I'll tell you I have experiences, and I have another group that will sort of support the 3 o'clock thing. But I want to ask you about the implant. You get help from the implant. At first, you didn't know what it was, but there again, you have some sort of help that you're getting in terms of guiding you, providing insights and stuff like that. Can you talk about the implant?
Yeah. The implant was put in this year in May of 1989. And I didn't know what it was about. I was terrified of it. I tried to have it taken out a few years later. And when the doctor touched it with his scalpel, it went down from here, down into here, into the earlobe. And he pulled out because he says, Whitley, I'm not here to take your ear off, and I can't get another way to do this. So then 2 days later, I felt a burning sensation, and it went back up from here, back up to where it is now, and where it remained. Annie's was against my getting it taken out from the very beginning, and I had promised her I would try once, and that was it. Somehow she knew it would fail, I suspect, because when you hear the video that was made of it, you hear her talking on, she's laughing and going on. She seems not in the least concerned, and she was real concerned about that being taken out. So, and I think she knew it would fail, and that it was going to be a funny situation, which it was. So years pass, and I can't figure out how to use it. It'll turn on every once in a while and turn the ear bright red. I'm working at that point with William Mallow. Bill Mallow was the head of material science at Southwest Research in San Antonio, and it was founded by a friend of my family, Tom Slick.
Okay.
And his niece and I are still very close friends. And so I was able to get pretty much carte blanche at Southwest, even though they wouldn't put any findings on their official letterhead. At least they would let us use the scanning electron microscope and all their equipment pretty much for free. So Bill and I are there, and we're talking about the implant in his office, and the ear turns bright red. And he says, Whitley, I say, Bill, I can feel it. He says, Whitley, your ear's bright red. And I said, it's turned on, Bill. It's turned on right now. We were talking about it turning on. And he said, let's go to signals acquisition and see what we can find. So we run across the campus to this signals acquisition unit, which is totally classified, and go inside. And I sit in the signals acquisition unit why they do what they do. And I don't see them or anything. Nobody tells me anything. And then I leave. And Bill can't tell me uh, what happened because it was classified. But he has a technique for this. What he does is he'll call me and he'll say, well, we found something very unusual about the implant in the signals lab. And then he calls me back, my guess is from his office phone, and says, we didn't find a thing. So that was the technique, and we both understood how that was working. Years later, I was at a library. I used to be allowed to speak at the San Antonio Public Library's annual festival, even though I am certainly among the top 5 best-known authors in Texas. I'm not welcome there anymore since a guy who was editor of Kirkus Reviews took over. I don't go there anymore, but I was at that time still welcome because it was being run by family friends. And I'm there giving my talk, and after the talk, a couple guys walk up to me, a lot of people there, and said, Whitley, we just want you to know that we participated in that signals acquisition. That signal is still under study all these years later and is the strangest signal in the possession of our organization. And they left. So there you have, that's the implant. Now, as to how it works in a lot of different ways. I think the best thing it does is it's somehow generates synchronicities. If I'm doing research and I need an answer, the answer falls into I find the right book. I happen to open something to the right page. That's why people are saying with Jesus and New Vision, how could you do all that research? You're not a Jesus scholar at all. I'm not a Jesus scholar, but believe me, the implant's a scholar of many different things. So I use the implant. I use it all the time in research. I don't have any other functional use for it. In other words, if I ask it questions about the stock market and stuff, I suspect that it might give me bad answers on purpose because that's not what it's there for. After Annie passed away, a little slit opened up in my left eye and I could see words passing through it very quickly. And my writing abilities and writing style immensely improved. I became a better writer than I'd ever been before. These 3 books are light years beyond anything else I wrote before. I mean, even beyond Communion and War Day, they really are. So, all written with the implant. And so these words, you can't see them, but you can't read them, but you can see them. I have lost some vision in this eye due to excessive attempts to look into a parallel universe, but that's a story we don't need to go into today. You save it for another time.
Okay.
Now it's in this eye. It moved to the right eye. So in any case, I've found that I was asking it, why is this working so well? And all of a sudden it slowed down and typing went through that said, it's me, Anne.
Wow.
And then it went on.
Wow.
And of course, she was my muse in the physical world. Now she's an even better muse in the non-physical. So interestingly enough, someone in the sort of semi-secret part of the whole thing was dying to get a CT scan of the implant. And I told this story in A New World, and this CT scan showed that there was nothing there. But it turned out, after I wrote A New World, that this guy figured out that they had put a block over the implant for some reason, so you couldn't see it.
Wow.
even though they didn't appear to be intelligence agents or nothing, it's just an ordinary lab. And that kind of thing happens all the time. You don't know how it happens. In any case, the implant still works really well. But before that happened, two people showed up here at this house at 4 o'clock in the morning. They were people. I've met them before quite a few times. And they came in and I knew them immediately. And I knew by the sound of the knock that it was not an ordinary situation. I knew to open the door. Let me put it that way. And they explained to me that the implant was designed by a man that the fellow here pronounced his name as Constantine Rawdive. And I didn't recognize the name. And they showed me how it worked, and they explained that the typed words are drawn from my inner mind, so that, in other words, when I'm thinking about something deeper in my mind, there's more thought going on, and the fast moving words draw that up, and it ends up in my outer mind. So it's a sort of a consciousness enhancing device. And they explained all of this. And then they said that this man had made it, and they asked me to not let anyone convince me to take it out because it was still needed it to be in there. And so they were afraid that this guy who was, and I'm sure they influenced someone's mind in that lab to put something over it that would cover it. So I thought about that name. What could it mean? So I Googled it, and I thought, oh my God, he said Rawdive. It's Constantine Rawdive, the electronic voice phenomenon expert. And I happen to know a man who is himself an expert on Rawdive. And I told him this story, and he said, Whitley, explains something to me. I've had a slit open in my left eye with words going through it for years. So the only other person I know who has the same thing is an expert on Constantine Rawdive.
Wow.
And, you think such a weird, convoluted story must be 10% or truth and 90% imagination. But then something confirming like that happens. And you realize none of it's imaginary. It's not imagination.
It's like, as they told you that what is it? You're the luckiest of the lucky, something to that effect.
Yeah, that was hard to believe at the time, but now I look back and I think she might have been telling me the truth, because, boy, when I look back on this life, it's been outwardly hell. I mean, being laughed at and being raped and then laughed at for being raped for 30 years is not easy. I always say that the last people who can safely be bullied, you can't make jokes about people for race, ethnicity, religion, being disabled or anything like that anymore. But it's open season on abductees and close encounter witnesses. It's fine to do anything you want to us to make us look like fools. And I had made the mistake of calling my rape a rectal probe because I was too modest, too reticent to say it what it was. And the result of that was years and years of laughter and the ruin of my career too. My books, people will buy books from a controversial author for sure, but not from one who's a laughingstock.
That's sad, but I think history will be like seen to be living at the time of Jesus or the signing of the Constitution or whatever. Now people are sort of asleep yet. They really don't understand what's going on. So let me ask you a last question, because I don't want to keep you all day, because you're busy. I say that you have to talk to the experiences. You got to talk to people like you who are in contact. So if say, for example, you were to leave tonight to go on your new voyage with Annie, what would be the ultimate message that you've learned over all these years with the visitors? What do they want? Why are they here? What do they want people to know?
They want communion with us. They want to experience our wonder. You know, there was an article published, a short article in Science magazine back in 1977 by D.B.H. Kuiper and Mark Morris, two astrophysicists. Or one of them was an astrophysicist, and I believe the other one is something else, and the discoverer of the Kuiper belt. In any case, they offered an opinion, a speculative opinion, I think is correct, that anyone coming here from another world would not have any interest at all here except in our discoveries and our discoveries of the world and the way we saw it as new, because they would have so much information. And I think they are here to participate in our wonder, because I think that they've used up the universe in a sense, that they're immensely knowledgeable and we are innocent. And I think their conundrum now, is how do they preserve this precious innocence so that they can enjoy our excitement of discovery without revealing too much of themselves, and also prevent us from going extinct because of overpopulation. So they're in a real quandary, because if they come out and they warn us, or they even do things to help us, then we know they're there, and our whole world focuses toward them. That's already about to happen to an extent. If this disclosure thing in June evolves very far, we're all going to know they're here. And that's going to already be a danger to their ability to enjoy our spontaneity. And I think that's what they're here for.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Whitley. It's been an honor to know you and to talk to you. And I will be promoting you. You don't have to worry about me. I think you're a historic figure in the UFO community. Almost like, I don't know if you knew Angela Joyner. I remember Angela Joyner was a reporter. She ended up losing her job because of covering the Stephenville, Texas story.
I remember very
well. And I always told her, because she said, no, I don't think I got fired. I said, yeah, Angela, in Canada, if they bring you into the room with your Rolodex and the computer in a box, you got fired. And so she tried to play it nice. I said, 500 years from now, your grandchildren will be proud that you were their grandmother. Right now, sometimes it looks, very dim that we're looked down on and stuff. But I think history will vindicate us.
Well, I better, because we've worked awfully hard for something. Somebody's tilting at windmills around here, but it's not us.
There you go. Thank you for sharing time with me. And we'll do Dreamland, and I'll share that story, that 3 o'clock story, which I think you'll find very interesting.
I'm looking forward to it, Grant.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.